Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to unpack something that's been happening somewhat beneath the surface, but it has major implications. Russia's shadow over Belarus is growing, even as Ukraine begins to move more quietly in response. There are signs of internal tension, subtle resistance, and calculated maneuvering, and in this fragile space, the balance of influence matters. Let me take you through what's going on inside Belarus, how Russia's grip is tightening, how opposition and Ukraine are reacting, and where things might head from here. Belarus under President Alexander Lukashenko has long been seen as a close Russian ally, not merely by partnership but by dependency. After the contested 2020 elections and the violent crackdown on protests, Moscow intervened politically and helped shore up Lukashenko's grip. Over time, Russia's military presence in Belarus has grown. Bases, logistical support, even deployments of tactical nuclear weapons have been floated. Wikipedia +2, The Washington Post +2, the country's sovereignty is under strain, and many see Belarus as increasingly subsumed into Russia's orbit rather than an independent player. Financial Times +1 Yet beneath the surface, there is resistance. Since 2020, a Belarusian partisan movement has persisted, composed of dissidents, activists, and former security personnel. Wikipedia, one of their key tactics has been sabotaging the railways, what's been called the Rail War. These acts aim to disrupt Russian military logistics, delay supplies, and undermine the use of Belarusian territory as a transit hub for the invasion of Ukraine. Wikipedia +1 cyber groups have also gotten involved, hacking systems tied to rail signaling and transport control, feeding intelligence to Ukrainian forces, and undermining the infrastructure that supports Russian operations. ABC +1, these efforts are dangerous and high risk, but they reflect a kind of internal defiance, a refusal to be a passive conduit for war. At the same time, there are signs of unease among Belarus's security officers and military. Some in Belarus's armed forces reportedly resist deeper involvement in Russia's war, especially being asked to send Belarusian troops into Ukraine. Opposition figures such as Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya have warned that if Lukashenko commits Belarus directly, he would face mass disobedience. The Irish Times, the idea is that many Belarusians do not see Ukraine as an enemy, and forcing them into a war would crack the social contract. That kind of internal resistance, even in whispers, matters in authoritarian systems. Russia, for its part, has been wary of even the appearance of absorbing Belarus outright. Putin has denied plans to annex Belarus, claiming Russia has no interest in absorbing anyone, even as the Kremlin's dominance in Belarusian policy grows. The Moscow Times +1 but denials haven't prevented integration. In 2024, Russia signed a treaty granting Belarus security guarantees under Russia's nuclear umbrella. AP News that means that in effect, if Belarus is attacked, Russia claims right to respond with tactical nuclear weapons. The message is that Belarus is now more deeply embedded under Russia's protective and controlling umbrella. In September 2025, Russia and Belarus held joint strategic military exercises known as Zapad 2025. Officially, about 13,000 troops participated, operating in Belarus and adjacent areas. Wikipedia, but observers note that past drills tend to mask broader deployments or repositioning of forces. Wikipedia +1 This exercise reinforces the message that Belarus is a theater of allied operations, not an independent host land. It also signals to Ukraine, NATO, and Belarusian citizens that Belarus is firmly under Moscow's strategic umbrella. What's the Ukrainian angle here? Ukraine must play its cards quietly but decisively. Openly targeting Belarus would risk escalation and provoke Russian retaliation, but ignoring Belarus's role gives Russia free reinforcement corridors. So Kiev appears to be calibrating moves intelligence operations, supporting Belarusian resistance and reinforcing its own northern defenses, all without triggering dramatic escalation. One sign of that is how Ukraine has increased focus on the Belarus border, including bolstering defenses in the north and monitoring discrete signs of troop movements. The Irish Times Ukraine's incursion into Russia's Kursk region in 2024 also shook Belarusian thinking. Lukashenko responded by consolidating military presence along Ukraine's border and signaling alignment with Moscow, but also trying to limit overt confrontation. The Kiev Independent plus one that tension between appearing useful to Russia while avoiding too much backlash is the tightrope Lukashenko walks. Another layer is how Belarus might be used as a fallback or buffer. If Russia encounters setbacks in Ukraine, it may shift operations or logistics through Belarus more aggressively. That means that Belarus, even if not formally a combatant, risks becoming a frontline in infrastructure, logistics, and sabotage warfare. And the internal resistance inside Belarus could become more active, especially if occupation burdens grow or repression escalates. Let's explore some possible flashpoints and trajectories in this delicate balance. One path: Russia deepens control overtly. Moscow might seek to tighten its grip on Belarus's institutions, security services, and infrastructure. Belarusian independence would shrink further, and opposition would be suppressed more ruthlessly. In that scenario, resistance inside Belarus may intensify, railway sabotage might grow, cyber and partisan efforts may escalate, and Ukraine could step up cross-border pressure. Another path: Lukashenko attempts a partial pivot. He retains cooperation with Russia, but tries to assert limited sovereignty, perhaps by releasing political prisoners, engaging in symbolic diplomacy with the West, or hinting at being able to mediate. He may attempt to exploit Russia's need for legitimacy to gain breathing space. That could slow integration and allow internal dissent to fester more openly. A third path: Belarus fractures gradually. The regime's legitimacy erodes, internal resistance gains momentum, and the regime is weakened. Russia must decide whether to intervene more directly or risk instability. Ukraine might support insurgent networks or back Belarusian opposition discreetly, but it would need to avoid giving Russia an excuse for a more aggressive move. All of these trajectories are risky and hang on many factors: how much Russia is willing to invest or press Belarus, how resilient the Belarusian internal opposition is, how much Ukraine and its allies support Belarusian resistance, and crucially, how much Lukashenko fears or calculates that he could lose control if he leans too far one way. One major unknown is how far Ukraine is willing to push. Striking installations in Belarus or supporting open resistance is fraught with danger. It could provoke a broader war front. But Ukraine already seems to be acting quietly, supporting networks, gathering intelligence, and preparing for possible escalation. Another wild card is public unrest in Belarus. Economic strain, discontent, and national identity questions could fuel protests. If Belarusians see their country sliding into a vassal state, that could spark larger uprisings, especially if emboldened by external signals. Then there's the risk of escalation from Russia itself. Moscow views Belarus as strategically vital. If it perceives Ukraine or NATO encroaching on its control, Russia might militarize Belarus further, stationing more troops, missiles, and using the territory more aggressively. That would raise the stakes dramatically for all sides. So why does this matter? because Belarus is more than a neighbor, it is a strategic fulcrum. If Russia controls Belarus completely, it gains safe corridors, nuclear projection capacity, and buffer depth. Ukraine's northern front becomes more vulnerable. NATO and the EU see a deeper front, and the internal struggle inside Belarus becomes part of the larger war narrative. We are in a moment where Belarus is contested territory in information, influence, and the shadows of control. Russia is asserting dominance, Belarusian resistance is trying to chip away at that control, and Ukraine is maneuver, in quietly but strategically, to shape the outcome. In this contest, Belarus might not be a battlefield of guns yet, but it's a battleground of shadows, rail sabotage, cyber war, resistance networks, and diplomatic posturing. The war is expanding not just across front lines, but into territories that were seen as behind the scenes. And how Belarus ends up in tighter submission, partial autonomy, or sliding toward internal fracture will shape the conflict's next phases. That's where things stand right now. If you'd like, I can map out possible timelines, track recent resistance actions in Belarus, or compare this to similar dynamics in history. Just say the word, and I'll dig deeper